Oh my, it's the Security Weekly News, and it's episode 341. It is Friday the 10th of November, 2023, and we've got for you fakes, SysAid, Sumo, farnetwork, CPUZ, Google, Chat-GPT, Aaran Leyland, and more news on the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for the Security Weekly News. AI, accelerated cloud adoption, and hybrid work are fundamentally shifting how business gets done. The old way of securing your people, apps, and data doesn't work and scale anymore. To stay ahead, today's organizations need to reimagine their security and networking infrastructure with a cloud-first, unified SASE architecture. Join Palo Alto Networks and leading technologists from across the globe for SASE Converge 2023, a two-day virtual experience, November 15th and 16th. Revealing how SASE powered by advanced AI can drive better security and networking outcomes. Register today at securityweekly.com/Palo Alto.
Business Security Weekly is live streamed and recorded on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Each week, we address the challenges facing CISOs through our guest interviews, including former and active CISOs. Our news segment is focused on leadership and communication to better help security leaders translate and communicate security risks into business risks. Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, Tyler Robinson, and others add their expertise to the conversation. I'm Matt Alderman, and I hope you search for Business Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher and subscribe to download our latest content.
All right, welcome to the Security Weekly News. I'm Doug White. So someone had been using Clop ransomware, and it's assumed that that was the Clop group, was using that to target MoveIt 0 days. And we did story after story about that for a while. And eventually, I guess, people managed to patch up to stop this from actually being, I'm sure there's still unpatched MoveIt out there, but, that's sort of been handled. And so now there's a new 0 day. This one that's being used for this same approach. This one is in SysAid IT support software, which I've never used, but I've heard of it. Microsoft found this and announced the flaw on the 8th of November and then commented that SysAid had indeed issued a patch the same day they were alerted to the vulnerability on the 2nd of November. So they held up a bit, I guess, to give people a chance to patch this before they released the information. SysAid, if you don't know what it is, an IT help desk and support service software that's used a lot of places in like healthcare and higher ed and manufacturing. So you'll see that, you may not see that software, but it may be being used at your organization. Microsoft Threat Intel, who is behind all this, said that the attacker that they call Lace Tempest had been known to use Clop ransomware in many different campaigns. And that same group had been one of the primary users of Clop ransomware against MoveIt earlier this, and then he had compromised hundreds of organizations in all those reports that we've already heard. The vulnerability here is a path traverser vulnerability, which would allow you to do code execution within the SysAid software itself in the on-prem version of it. So I guess if you're using the cloud version, this is not a 0 day, but it is an on-prem 0 day. It did not say how... If that was, it must be remote because they're able to do that. But basically what they had been doing was they're uploading a WAR archive, which contains a web shell and a bunch of other payloads, whatever they want to put in it. And that goes into the web root of SysAid Tomcat Web Service. So just that directory folder, I guess, where you're pushing that in on Tomcat. SysAid then says they're recommending that if you are running on-prem versions of SysAid, that you should patch immediately. There's a patch available, and I know that patching SysAid is a bit of a challenge from what I read about it. But you need to patch it, and then you need to, of course, keep it updated. So fairly obvious recommendations there. They did provide detailed indicators of compromise you can get, so you can check to see if you think you've been compromised. So basically the recommendation here in this article is whatever you're running, whether it's SysAid or not, you need to get your patching plan together, you need to keep it running, and you need to be testing it to make sure that it's working the way you thought, because these things are getting faster and faster, and our patching gets slower and slower, so this is a bad combination, so get on that. Well, if you were trying to use Chat-GPT or the Chat-GPT API, there was apparently a major outage on Wednesday this week due to a distributed denial of service attack on the platform. The disruptions of the platform started on the 7th of November. That was Tuesday. But the major outage apparently happened on the 8th. I didn't happen to be using ChatGPT on the 8th, so I didn't notice it. The group that has claimed credit for it calls themselves Anonymous Sudan. And they said the outage was theirs. They put that on their Telegram channel, and it says they were targeting OpenAI for being an American organization and for cooperation with Israel. Now, Anonymous Sudan on their site claims to be a hacktivist group, which is motivated by religious and political causes, and that they in the past have targeted Microsoft, Twitter, Telegram, etc. But that all sounds pretty typical. But it appears, based on the intel that's being collected about this, that the group is not actually from Sudan, but rather the group is a bunch of Russian hackers, which includes the KillNet group. And the rumors in the industry and this article say that they may well be affiliated with the Russian government. Imagine that. But ChatGPT, I did check it this morning. It was up and running. I asked it some questions about this attack, and as you might guess, it denied anything happening. So I think it could be a cover-up. It wouldn't comment on the attack on Wednesday, and when I asked very specific questions, it basically started giving me the old, sorry, I don't know about anything that happened after 2022. So I suspect trained communist wombats are working among us wearing Ronald Reagan masks. Wouldn't surprise me a bit. Yeah. I mean, they're out there. So you see one of those, watch out. Sumo said on Tuesday that a potential security incident found on the 3rd of November involved unauthorized access to a Sumo Logic AWS account through compromised credentials. So no hack here, just somebody got the credentials and got in. Sumo went on to say there was no indication there had been any impact on the company, but they issued a statement advising users to, quote, rotate credentials that are either used to access Sumo Logic or that you have provided to Sumo Logic to access other systems. Yeah, I wouldn't just rotate them. I think, you pretty much want to scrap those and burn them with fire for all time, but I know what they meant. They went on to say that the most urgent credentials you need to change right now are the API access keys, but as a precaution, users should also change Sumo Logic installed collector credentials, third-party credentials you stored with Sumo, and user passwords for a Sumo account. So basically, the article says at this point, they don't know exactly what happened. They just saw compromised credentials being used. Therefore, it's possible that somebody went in there and exfiltrated a bunch of information. But they don't have any evidence that that actually happened. So they are advising you to reset all your passwords on Sumo, so and all your keys and tokens and everything else. So get on that too. Group IB researchers were put in contact with an actor they track as farnetwork, and they actually sat for a job interview for farnetwork as an affiliate in this, and if you aren't familiar with farnetwork, this is a private ransomware as a service group. So farnetwork told the research team that they had run the Nokayawa ransomware as a service affiliate program since 2022. So during this job, and I will tell you, when I first went to, anti-intelligence, that doesn't sound right, anti-intelligence training, that one of the things that people would do is pose as potential employees to interview for jobs because they can often get a lot of information during a job interview process. So I think one of my reasons for putting this story up was to remind you that you need to be sure you are aware of what's going on in job interviews. We've seen all this stuff about North Korean operatives accepting, remote work and all this kind of stuff. But there's certainly a process where people sit down with each other via remote or in person and talk a lot about their companies and what they're doing. And you need to probably sanitize some of that a little bit. But not only did farnetwork brag about doing that ransomware operation, but they also said that they had operated a botnet that was being used to provide affiliates with access to compromised corporate networks. And with all the intel collected, Group IB was able to piece together a history of farnetwork, which is a Russian-speaking group, and they traced them all the way back to 2019. FarNetwork also uses handles like FarNetwork, L, Jingo, JSWorm, Razvarat, Piper Kuka, and FarNetwork Kit, and a whole bunch of others. And they've been associated with projects like JSWorm, Karma, Nimti, and Nephilim. All those different pieces of malware and so forth have been affiliated with them. FarNetwork went on to claim that the ransomware as a service project they managed in 2019, which Group IB said is probably Nimti, received ransom payments of $1 million on average per victim, and that had fallen off to around 600,000 later in that campaign. So they were doing a lot of bragging and boasting during this job interview with this potential affiliate. FarNetwork did announce that they were leaving ransomware business back in June, and that the Nokayawa dedicated leak site stopped operating last month. But basically, the article goes on to say Group IB says they probably will be back. They're probably just changing their name. As the heat gets hotter, everybody changes their name, retools, and comes back as something new. So don't think they're gone forever. But my point was, you might want to monitor your interviewing processes and see what people are talking about. Excuse me. This article has some recommendations for dealing with AI and the coming most likely chaotic era of AI regulation attempts. So I'm not talking about being afraid of AI. I'm talking about being afraid of people trying to regulate AI in a very fully meshed world. We'll see what I went through their recommendations. I'll tell you what I think. One, that they advised establishing an AI risk assessment and governance model in your organization. I think that's a great idea. I mean, it maybe is a subgroup of your other risk management group or whatever, but I think it's probably a good idea at this time, if you have the resources, to put somebody on this and start monitoring. Again, you need to monitor AI, but you also need to monitor the regulatory environment. That's important. And I do think you need this. What are your policies about this stuff? Are you going to let employees use this? Is it okay if I use an Chat-GPT to write recommendation letters or whatever? Do you even have a CAIO, bro? I mean, if you don't know what that is, I had not seen that term before. A CAIO is a Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer, and I still don't know if it means that's an actual artificial intelligence or it's like a person dealing with it. Yeah. Anyway, 2, stay in close contact with NIST and leverage the agency's expertise. Again, I agree. I mean, NIST puts out tons of free content. They do a lot of science. It's not just some, hokum group. They are a government-funded agency, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. They have a lot of great people there, and they write a lot of white papers that analyze some of this stuff. So why not? And 3, brace for potential regulatory impact. This is the one I think that I would be advising clients about pretty soon. I completely agree with this recommendation. If you're embracing AI, whether it's just in some indirect way, like you're letting employees use it to get information, or you're building it into your own products, both figuratively and maybe even literally. I don't know if you're embracing AI literally yet or not, but you probably will be. But depending on where you sit, regulation could have massive impacts on your business model, your products, and so on. And so monitoring that's, I think, going to be pretty critical, because if you're building a new SIM, and you're building some kind of AI model into it, and government regulation is going to change how you do business, much like the GDPR and other privacy legislation has had huge impacts on a lot of companies. You probably want to be progressive about this and stay in front of it. So I think this article's some pretty good tips about it, and about everything else for that matter. A Malvertising campaign is using fake sites that pretend to be legit Windows news portals, but propagate a malicious installer called CPU-Z. CPU-Z is not necessarily a bad thing. It basically is a system profiling tool. It's just often then used to install malware or other, it has a lot of power, and because of the way it operates, it pretty much is running as root. According to Malwarebytes, who is reporting on this, they quote, "The incident is a part of a larger Malvertising campaign that targets all sorts of utilities like Notepad++, Citrix, and VNC Viewer." Basically, this is the same stuff that you see all the time. You do a search for Notepad++, you get a whole pile of links to potentially download Notepad++, and, if they can get lucky and their link is clicked, then you end up with CPU-Z installed on your system, and then that can be used to install other stuff. And I mean, malvertising is very common. It's all over the place. They're really just trying to get you to click off of a search engine to redirect you to some fake portal. And then, of course, they actually have a bunch of testing in there to ensure that, one, they're finding people who are bots trying to seek out malvertising and or people running sandboxes that they don't want to get involved with. So if you're browsing there via that, you end up just on a blog that's got some other, articles and such. And that's hopefully misdirecting people who are looking for the site. But the installer, if you actually get there, is going to basically be fake bat or Eugen loader, which I think those are the same thing. But and they basically are using those to deploy all sorts of things. So be careful out there. This is really tough to defend against. And telling your employees, be very careful about where you click is easy, but getting them to actually do that, and even can they figure it out, is tricky. Apparently, Google spent about $26.3 billion with a B dollars just in 2021 just to get Apple, Samsung, and other phone companies and also software manufacturers to hide the setting on their device or tool which determines which browser will be the default search engine. Yeah. That's some pretty valuable real estate right there. So if you can get people to force install Google as a search engine or switch to Google as a search engine, you don't want them to make it easy to switch away from that. And so Google's been paying people to keep those settings hidden pretty well so that you'll have to do some work to figure it out. And of course, people who can access your search history have a pretty valuable piece of real estate, and they can also even track your location if you have those features turned on. So they get a lot from it. Essentially, Google pays the makers of phones, laptops, and browsers to be the default search engine, and in whatever environment they're doing. And they also pay to get them not to offer other options during setup if that's legal. Some places it's not legal, but in the U.S., we don't have much going for us in terms of internet privacy and so forth. Now, in order to get the payout, and this is based on an antitrust suit against Google, so they were pulling this out of the court documents. Google requires their partners to make Google the default and not provide any choices at all during the setup. So there's an antitrust lawsuit about them being a monopoly. So I don't know. It's like Coca-Cola paying United Airlines not to serve Pepsi. And if you ask for Pepsi, they say, wouldn't you really rather have a Coca-Cola? And you say, no, I'd really rather have a Pepsi, even though I don't really want either one. I'd rather have, I'll have a Michter's Celebration, thank you very much. But nevertheless, all that stuff is often, into the antitrust courts. Interesting story, though. So if you like that kind of stuff. Well, that's great. It starts with an earthquake, birds and snakes, an airplane, and Lenny Bruce is not afraid, and neither is Aaran Leyland. Hi, Aaron.
Hey, Dr. Doug, I see you've had a haircut. I was told today I was a very hairy person.
I've heard that.
And the thing is, as the majority of our audience never actually watches us live on YouTube and as such, they wouldn't know how hairy you sometimes are and how hairy I mostly am.
Yeah, well, I've seen those old pictures of you where you were all clean cut and looking all posh.
Yeah, my military days, although only 5 years ago, feel like a completely other lifetime. Clean shaven was...
It looks like a completely other lifetime, too.
Yeah. Maybe I'm lying about the years, and I
do like the pictures, though. It's fun to see young Aaron all crisp and refreshed.
The 17-year-old picture when I'm in between my mother and sister, and I still wasn't able to shave 2 years later. That's quite a beautiful picture.
But then all those steroids and foreign foods.
Yeah, Botox, steroids, all the rest of the stuff. Okay. Right. I mostly chose this story because in the office this week, we talked a lot on SolarWinds, and it threw up some nice discussion, but also because of the title of this story. As it says, SolarWinds says, SEC sucks, watchdog, in quotation marks, lacks competence to regulate cybersecurity. So I couldn't find out verbatim whether SolarWinds actually said that the SEC sucks, but let's hope that they did. And I don't know if they suck or not. We should look at Business Security Weekly and ask them if that's true. Okay, I think this is going to play out to be a really big story in the coming months. So the fact that the last 3 weeks the news has been a bit pedestrian and boring, I think this is going to be a story that's going to go on and on and on. So let's start with a quick recap of what went on with SolarWinds, even though probably most of us, it's well ingrained in us. But anyway, if you're a bit newer, let's go. The SolarWinds cyber attack of 2020 stands as a significant milestone in the era of escalating cyber threats, with repercussions extending into the present day. SolarWinds, an Oklahoma-based company, not sure why that matters, offers SaaS solutions for IT infrastructure management, making it a vital player in the industry. It's big. It really is big. Lots of massive companies use it. So the company's flagship product, Orion, became the focal point of the attack due to its extensive access to customer data and system logs. Exploited SolarWinds Orion platform through a supply chain attack, which was quite a sophisticated attack, to be honest, involving insertion of malicious code into the software framework. The backdoor created in this process allowed hackers to impersonate users and gain access to sensitive information, all while concealing their activities within the legitimate framework. The intrusion began with a compromise of SolarWinds network in late 2019, but by spring 2020, and this is a name that you'll hear lots, a malicious update named Sunburst was distributed to customers, infecting over 18,000 systems globally. And the stealthy nature of the attack, coupled with the widespread use of Orion, facilitated its rapid and extensive dissemination. Cybersecurity firm FireEye, they're pretty good, as we know, played a pivotal role in detecting the malware and identifying the Sunburst update responsible for the breach. And once discovered, a collaborative effort ensued, with SolarWinds swiftly releasing hot fixes to eliminate the backdoor Trojan, and this prompted a global response from organizations. That's how big this was. Other really large organizations just got right involved, including Microsoft, which issued security patches to address the threat. The attack's impact was profound, obviously, with the 18,000 SolarWinds customers, especially because they included major entities like US Departments of Health, Treasury and State, and, as we said, private companies such as FireEye, Intel, Cisco, and Microsoft also fell victim to the malware's reach. So big. The ability of Sunburst update to replicate exponentially posed a challenge in estimating the true extent of the breach. And recently, actually, the current belief is that it was carried out by Cozy Bear, for people that like numbers and letters, also known as APT29. Okay, so now that we've recapped, back to the article. So the recent clash between SolarWinds and the US Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, over the 2020 Sunburst cyber attack has brought forth a heated legal debate. In a robust defense, SolarWinds challenges, that's what lawyers do, I guess, that's why they pay them the big bucks, the SEC's competence, and contends that the lawsuit is deeply flawed. SolarWinds vehemently rejects the SEC's claim that it lacked adequate security controls before the Sunburst attack. The company asserts that it had robust cybersecurity measures in place and accuses the SEC of presenting a distortive narrative by selectively quoting documents out of context. The dispute intensifies as SolarWinds questions the SEC's authority and competence to regulate cybersecurity for public companies, coming out with the big guns there, punching. So the crux of SolarWinds' defense centers on technical aspects, as it would with expensive lawyers, challenging specific SEC allegations. Notably, the company denies the existence of VPN vulnerability that allegedly facilitated the Sunburst attackers' access. SolarWinds meticulously dissects the SEC's technical arguments, emphasizing the divergence between the NIST cybersecurity framework and the standards it claims the SEC misinterpret it. The SEC's lawsuit delves into SolarWinds communication practices, asserting that the company, along with its CISO, Timothy G. Brown, misled investors about security practices and risks. Very dangerous. SolarWinds counters some claims but remains conspicuously silent on others, leaving questions about the veracity of statements made in the security disclosures. So this next part gets a bit more interesting for us cybersecurity professionals. The case underscores the increasing accountability of chief information security officers, look at Uber, and their pivotal role in shaping cybersecurity postures. Experts predict that the SEC's litigation will empower CISOs to resist compromises on security practices. Cybersecurity professionals, however, find themselves in a precarious position, caught between the imperative of transparency and the risk of exposing vulnerabilities that could be exploited by threat actors, really leaving us cybersecurity professionals between a rock and a hard place while we're trying to be business enablers for those that pay our wages, so maybe even putting us in conflict with them. Hopefully not. The debate extends beyond the immediate legal skirmish, raising questions about the regulation of cybersecurity controls and the accountability of CISOs. Comparisons with the highly regulated financial sector highlight potential gaps in the overseeing cybersecurity practices. So experts suggest that irrespective of the case's outcome, it may generate regulatory advancements in the cybersecurity domain. Let's see how they get on. As the legal landscape evolves, CISOs are advised to adopt defensible public communication strategies. Sounds good. The SolarWinds case serves as a cautionary tale, emphasizing the need for careful articulation of security postures to avoid regulatory pitfalls. The lack of consistent regulatory standards for CISOs in comparison to financial counterparts invites discussions on the industry's regulatory future. Crazy stuff. Okay. The aftermath of SolarWinds' SEC confrontation could herald significant changes in the cybersecurity realm, which we can only hope. Anything to make our jobs a little easier, right? Insights from experts suggest that the litigation might contribute more to cybersecurity progress than a decade of breaches. Now we can only dream, probably. CISOs armed with legal backing may emerge as a formidable advocates for robust cybersecurity practices, reshaping industry dynamics. Now they have me praying. Okay, so in conclusion, the SolarWinds SEC legal dispute encapsulates the evolving landscape of cybersecurity regulation and accountability. Beyond the immediate legal wranglings, it prompts critical reflections on industry practices, communication strategies, and the role of the regulators in shaping a resilient cybersecurity ecosystem. As the case unfolds, its ramifications are poised, I think, to influence cybersecurity standards and practices, potentially reshaping the future for cybersecurity governance. That could be a good thing. Okay. Back to the governor of the show and the man who might be held legally accountable for my actions, Dr. Doug in the studio.
Okay, I don't think my liability insurance is going to cover me being held responsible for your actions because I'm not sure that's insurable at this point. But I'll ask just to make sure, and I'll have to have a full list of all your debauchery and hijinks over the last 3 years so I can get a proper policy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. And finally, if you've ever been to Temple Street in Hong Kong, which is cool, or if you ever walked around the Port Authority in New York, or even to the what they call the Thieves Market in Ho Chi Minh City, you know that counterfeit goods are everywhere. I mean, you can buy anything, and it may look like the real thing, or it may not. You know, I mean, it may be so fake that it doesn't even look like the real thing, or it's not even spelled correctly. And when you're looking at it, and you're going, I don't think that's how you spell Yves Saint Laurent. You know, and they're like, no, that's how it's spelled in Asia. I said somebody, I was trying to buy I knew it was fake, but I was just trying to buy a bag that would survive a very long trans-Pacific flight to get a bunch of stuff that they gave us there home. And I was like, I wonder if this piece of junk will hold up. You know, and this was like a fake bag, a fake piece of luggage. But, and I remember all those old Pineapple computers and that pair of Adidas you bought where it was spelled wrong. Yeah, that kind of stuff. I do remember a student who had full knowledge, and I even made a point of asking, buying 3 pairs of Beats by Dre for like $5 on Temple Street. I was like, those things are going to break really quick, right? And in fact, all of them broke except one pair by the time he actually got on the plane to go home. But they cost $5, so whatever. But, and I remember the orange drop capacitor nightmare where they were taking the orange drop or cheap capacitors and then putting them inside of fake orange drop capacitors so they could sell them cheaper. And, Lou was having to cut them open to see if they were fakes or not. And I ended up having to drive a long distance to get to this electronics store where they supposedly had real ones. But this whole article was about this company called Lumafield using their Neptune scanner, which is an industrial CT scanner, and examining electronics. They were looking at comparisons between counterfeit AirPods, counterfeit Apple power adapters, and the $130 Thunderbolt 4 cable that Apple sells. And they found, of course, that the fakes, suck. They're cheap. They're maybe dangerous in some cases, like the power adapter. They said they weren't sure if it might overheat and other things like that. But that's what fakes are, right? I mean, they're always like that. Li Fang, I got to say it correctly, a Li Fang that looks like a Mini Cooper. It looks like a Mini Cooper, but it may not be the same. So fake products can be a real menace unless you know what you're buying. So, I mean, of course, a Li Fang has, it's written on it doesn't even say, Mini Cooper or something like that. It's literally a Chinese car that just looks like that. Or what were those old Zots or something? Or Zills. Remember the Russians used to make Zills, and they had one that looked like a 55 Chevy and all this kind of stuff. Well, so if you don't have a CT machine to test your stuff, you might have a problem, but use the old guide. If everybody else on the street is selling Beats Studio Pro headphones for $349.99, and maybe you saw somebody selling them for $340 and, even, or maybe even $330 on sale, but there's this guy named Bert selling them for $50 over by the Port Authority, or maybe you'll take $40 even over on 8th Avenue. You get the idea. So before you buy this stuff, think about it a little bit. Well, that's the news. Thank you, Aaron, and I will see you next week on the Security Weekly News, and happy Veterans Day.